Hi guys, welcome to my ramble about Ozark Season 4. I am dressed like a clown today. My hat goes all the way up. I don't even know if you can see it. It's so big. But yeah, I don't want to do a bunch of video editing in order to make this fun for you to watch. But clowns are fun to watch, so I am a clown today. So, disclaimer, Ozark Season 4, I'm going to be talking about spoilers. If you didn't watch Ozark Season 4 yet, go watch it. I don't know why you're here. I will tell you everything that happens. Sorry. Another disclaimer, I'm not qualified to do media analysis. I don't have a degree in literature. My degree is in chemistry, which is like on the opposite end of the academic spectrum. But I am an enthusiast about art and I have something to say, so I'm just gonna tell you how I feel about Ozark Season 4. So yeah, the first thing I want to talk about is the big glaring plot hole, which Ozark has done before. Sam was arrested at the end of Season 3. Maya arrested him. So how did he get out of jail? We don't get to know. I guess maybe they pulled some political strings to get him out, but they certainly didn't have Maya get him out because she's the one who arrested him. So why did Sam get out of jail? I don't know. But they did tell us that Jade dumped him and sold his mom that was pressed into a diamond, which is hilarious. And honestly, you go girl, because she was way too good for him. Sam is a loser. But yeah, they did this before in like Season 2. I think both of them were in Season 2, where Ruth and her dad break into the funeral home, right? And they're going to steal all of Marty's money, and they totally mess up the room with all the caskets looking for its money, and then they just leave, and they don't show them cleaning it up, but they never speak of it again. So like, I guess Ruth just went back the next day and cleaned it up before Marty saw it. I guess I can give them that. But then also at the end of Season 2, the KC mob bombed the casino offices, and they never speak of it again. So I don't think that that would have just gotten cleaned up off screen. So I don't know. I kind of had hoped that they would learn their lesson from all the fans noticing those Season 2 plot holes, but they did it again with Sam's arrest. So I don't know. That's just too bad. But that's really the only bad thing I had to say about the season. The next thing I want to talk about is kind of the references that there were in it. I noticed 3 different Breaking Bad references, which is a little disappointing for me, just because, like, there already have been so many comparisons between Ozark and Breaking Bad, and it just seems like a little bit of a cop-out to like directly reference 3 different scenes in Breaking Bad in your final season. But I love Breaking Bad, and there are similarities, and they spiced up the references a little bit, which I'll get into one by one, so like I'm not that mad about it. And there was also a very obvious Pulp Fiction reference when Ruth gives the adrenaline shot to that famous chef guy that OD'd in the casino. I only watched the season through once so far, so I don't remember his name, but that was definitely a Pulp Fiction moment, which I thought was good, because there's definitely that same kind of like absurdist and chaotic, but like with dry humor thing that's both in Ozark and in Pulp Fiction, but they do it in a very different way. So I think that that one totally worked. The Breaking Bad references though, so again, I only watched through the season once, so I might get like the chronological order of these wrong, but the first one I noticed was when Wendy witnesses Darlene having the heart attack in her driveway, and she like for a second she kind of sits down like she's not going to call the ambulance, but then at the last second she does call the ambulance. That was definitely a direct callback to the scene in Breaking Bad where Walter White shows up at Jesse's house and he sees Jane overdosing and he decides not to save her. So first of all, I'm glad that they went a different direction with it and that Wendy did actually call the ambulance, even though she like at first didn't seem like she was going to. And also they really took the parallel to like another step of showing how these characters are progressing, because in the Breaking Bad one, Walter White really was directly responsible for Jane's death, because remember he goes in and he tries to wake up Jesse and he shakes him, and then that makes Jane roll over, and then she starts like vomiting and overdosing. So it kind of really was Walter that like caused the whole thing in the first place. And it's like the same in Ozark, because Wendy was like stepping up on Darlene. She was like, what the fuck are you gonna do about it? And then that gave Darlene like a little spook, and then that's when she had the heart attack. So they really took that parallel all the way up until the last second when she calls the ambulance. And I like that because we are kind of seeing that Wendy is kind of the Walter White of this story. Like, at first we think that Marty is the Walter White parallel, but Wendy is the one who is getting up in her own ego, right? She thinks she's all powerful and she's like this big political player and she can do anything she wants, and she's going and talking about Ben's death and like, you know, making this whole story that's like politically advantageous for her foundation when it's a total lie because she's like too big for her britches, and then it comes back to them, right? And so that whole transformation is very Walter White, so I'm glad that they're leaning in that direction with her character. The second Breaking Bad reference that I noticed was when Navarro was talking to Javi, and they say blood over everything, which is a callback to when Don Hector in Breaking Bad was talking to one of the two cousins that look exactly the same, and I can never remember which is which, but he tells him, La familia es todo. Family is everything, or family is all. And so I like how they like change this to kind of give it a double entendre, because family is all, like, that's pretty cut and dry. And blood over everything, like, it means the same thing of like the blood of your family is more important than anything, but of course the double entendre is there's blood all over everything, and that's because they put their family first over anything else, and they're willing to kill anyone to keep their family cartel, you know, safe and running. So it just kind of gives another layer of that. So I wasn't mad about that one. The last one is when we see Ruth driving away from the Bird's house, right? And she's like in the car, and there's like the last shot of her like screaming when she drives away in the car. And so that's definitely a parallel to the last scene of Jesse that we see in Breaking Bad when he's driving away from the white supremacist like welding place or whatever it is. And he has just gotten away from being a captive, right? And so he finally has his freedom for the first time in a long time. He drives away screaming. And so there already has been a character parallel between Ruth and Jesse, because they're both like the right-hand man of the main guy, right? And so they both like, they can be relied upon, and they get a bunch of money because they're working with this person, but then they also receive the brunt of their mistakes. Like Jesse and Ruth both get beat up like within an inch of their lives and end up in the hospital because of who they're working for, because they're the second of command. They get beat up, and then their bosses don't retaliate in a satisfactory way to them, so they feel like their loyalty to their boss is not reciprocated, right? And so I thought it was like, I don't know, it was a little bit cheesy that they did that with her, but the parallel between those two characters is strong enough that like it makes sense that after they get out of this traumatic experience and they're both at this point where they have nothing, that then they get this parallel driving away scene. Like, it's fine. But of course we know Ruth is not done and she's coming back for revenge, so that'll all be very interesting. Which, now that we're talking about Ruth, is she gonna date Frank Jr.? Like, that is not something that I would have guessed from the previous seasons, but there's this little moment when she calls Frank Jr. and she thinks that he was the one that killed Darlene and Wyatt, and he says, "Oh, did you change your mind about running away with me?" And so then I was like, oh, Frank Jr. asked her to run away with him? Like, that's cute, which, I don't know, it's just so funny how, like, the whole time Darlene being batshit crazy and just, like, killing random people whenever she feels like it is, like, most of the time it's a huge problem. But then when she shot Frank Jr.'s dick off, it actually was, like, a good lesson for him, and he, like, became a better person from it. So I just thought that was really funny that, like, one of Darlene's crazy moments actually like did something good for somebody. Kind of. But yeah, it does also kind of make sense though that Frank Jr. and Ruth would have this kind of connection, because they both have lost their fathers who got them into a life of crime, right? Like, neither one of them really chose what their life was going to be, but their fathers were both, lifelong criminals, and so they just kind of got roped into this, like, legacy of crime that they didn't ask for and that they, are not necessarily suited for. Like, we see that Frank Jr. is, like, not into killing people directly, or at least he doesn't directly, go and kill Darlene and for killing his dad, and then when Ruth asked him not to, he's like, okay. So we see that, like, they have this connection about not being suited for the life that they were born into. So I don't know, it'll be interesting to see where they go with that. Another thing that I really liked about Ruth's character development this season was that scene where she does the last job to help Marty, right? She goes to the trap house to get the drugs that Marty accidentally sold, or that she had sold to these guys, and now Marty needs the drugs back for the pharmaceutical thing, right? And they don't show us how she gets it done. She goes in there and she makes her spiel, and the guy's like, fuck you, don't tell me how to run my business. And then she doesn't get another bargaining chip, but somehow she gets it done. And so that kind of puts us in the same position as the audience as Marty's in, where we're both like, we don't know how she got it done, but we trust that Ruth can get the job done because she's Ruth fucking Langmore, and that's all you need to know. And so they really just kind of put that stamp on her this season by putting us in the same emotional place as Marty. And so, yeah, I guess before we get to the Marty stuff, I am going to come back to this scene with Marty and Ruth and, like, their last job together. But I want to talk about Wendy before we get to that, because it's kind of a big question mark for me. I was talking to my parents about this, about whether Wendy likes it. Like, I am under the impression that Wendy's having a good time. Like, obviously she has her moments where she really freaks out and, like, realizes how wrong her life is. Like, after she kills Ben and she's totally just like, what are we doing? Like, everything about my life right now is incorrect. But then the next season she comes back and she turns it around and uses that whole situation to her political advantage, even though it's really risky, because she's so in it now. And like she said at the end of season 3 when she was talking to Ben when they were, like, running away, she said, after you've been fighting for your life, everything else seems extremely dull. And so it's like, yeah, even though she has these extreme ups and downs about, she's freaking out about Ben and she's yelling at Jonah all the time and she's like, this is destroying my family, I'm trying to keep my family together, she's having a good time, I think. So let me know in the comments if you think that Wendy is in it to win it and that she is the Walter White of this show, or if she's just scrambling to save her family and everything she's doing is just her foresight and understanding this game that they're playing better than anyone else, and so she's just being ruthless to protect her family. So let me know what you think about that. It's a debate in my family. But that comment about the game they're playing kind of brings me to my last little section that I want to talk about here, which is kind of the thematic, thread that's been going through since at least season 3 about how this is a game. Because when Marty gets kidnapped and, like, taken to Mexico in season 3, right, Navarro tells Wendy, which he could be lying, Maya did that thing with the red flag on the account and then Marty was the only one who fixed it. So then we know that, like, Marty is still essential to Navarro's operation, so we had to let him go. But Navarro tells Wendy that the reason he lets him go is that Marty is the same as him because he wants to win. And I think that he was telling the truth because, like, as good as Marty is, we know Navarro's not going to have somebody in his ranks that he can't trust. Like, that's just not how the cartel works. And so what he means by this is that, like, if Marty was motivated by love for his family, that comes from outside of Navarro. If Marty was motivated by money, he could get that outside of Navarro. If he was motivated by power or freedom or, just the thrill of it, like, whatever it is that Marty wants, he could get from outside of Navarro and therefore could possibly betray Navarro one day. But because what Marty wants is to win, that will trump everything, because being obsessed with a game is something that's going to stick to that game. If you're obsessed with winning a game, you can't get the satisfaction by going and winning at something else. Like, no, this is the game you're playing. You're not going to leave until you win. And so because Marty is obsessed with the game, Navarro knows that value for Marty will come before anything else because of the obsession. It'll come before his family. He already put his family in so much danger in order to win this game. It's going to come before his financial security or his own like physical safety. Like, Navarro knows about the obsession because that's Navarro's same obsession. And so it's just really interesting. I will link, by the way, a couple of videos below. I forget what YouTubers they're by, but I will definitely put the links in the description about these two videos that have kind of shaped a little bit how I see this kind of thematic development. One of them is about how Marty Bird's calculation and always playing the game ties into how Jason Bateman is directing and acting at the same time in a lot of these episodes. So like Jason Bateman is calculating how everything should go in the scene to get everything, you know, coming across as he wants on the screen, at the same time as Marty Bird is calculating all his little pieces on the board and what everybody else could do. And so that just like really ties in terms of like what's literally happening. And then there's this other video about how the game that Marty is playing is kind of an allegory for neoliberalism, because like the neoliberal like economic structure that we're living in is one where you get told that you can work your way to the top and that it's a meritocracy, but then there are actually all of these systems in place where certain people have advantages and certain people have roadblocks, and that the game that you're told that you're playing isn't actually the game that you're playing, right? And so that just kind of ties into Marty's actions all of the time, because he knows that he can't win without breaking the law, right? Like the criminal game that he is playing is kind of like cheating the system, because he realized that the system that he's in, he cannot win without cheating. And so there's always this like back and forth, right, of like he's cheating the system and the system's cheating him. So it's like a meta game. And it's just really interesting how the players that don't play the game, or I guess the characters that don't play the game, are kind of not in a very good position, because the two characters that I see as not playing that game are Wyatt and Maya. They are making decisions on their own moral values and like what they think is right and wrong, because Maya goes and arrests Navarro after they have this whole FBI deal put together, but then she's like, that's not real justice, because then you're working with Navarro instead of like taking down the bad guys. I thought I was in this job to take down the bad guys. And so she goes and flips the board game over, right? Like she's not playing with the FBI's rules. She's going to go and arrest this guy anyway because she thinks it's the right thing to do. And then Wyatt, he knows that Darlene is an unpredictable player in this game and that she will cause them to lose because she just shoots people willy-nilly. And so he realizes that like in order to win the game, he needs to leave with Ruth and get out before Darlene gets them all killed. But his moral value judgment comes into play when Zeke is going to be taken away from Darlene. And so to him, like, it's more important to keep the family together and to not let Darlene and Zeke be lonely, even though he loses the game. He's with Darlene and then he gets killed because he's with her. So I think that might be a little bit of foreshadowing for Maya that if you're gonna be in the game, you better play, or else it's gonna get you killed. Like you can't step outside of the game and flip the board game over, because then you're Wyatt. So hopefully Maya's a little bit smarter than Wyatt, because I do really like her, but just foreshadowing wise, that doesn't really bode well because you have to play the game. And that is just going to take me to my last little quote from the show that I want to talk about, which was when Navarro was talking to Marty and he said, "You don't win until I win." And then later, Marty repeats back to him, yeah, I know, I don't win unless you win. And Navarro says, no, you don't win until I win. Because Marty's success is tied to Navarro's. If it was unless I win, then that would leave open the possibility that maybe Navarro loses the game, and then Marty also loses that particular game, but maybe he goes on with his life and he just lives on and has a regular life as the loser of the cartel game. But no, that would be that Marty could have a life without winning. He doesn't win until Navarro wins, which means that he is either going to win with Navarro or he's going to die. There isn't an alternate, unless situation. It's the Game of Thrones, really. He wins or he dies. So that's why it's until instead of unless. I just think it's going to be really interesting how they wrap up those themes in season 4, where everyone has their own place in the game and who's going to win and who's going to lose and who's going to try and step out of those guidelines of the game, which could be really interesting for Jonah, because Jonah is kind of heading in the direction of somebody who's ready to flip the board game over, right? I personally have a prediction that Jonah is going to either directly kill his parents, or maybe just Wendy, or he will indirectly allow them to die so that he and Charlotte can escape, because we have seen him in this situation a couple of times where he had to make a choice between killing someone to save his family or, turning his back on his family, because that scene, I think it was in season 2, when he almost shoots the guy that's in their house. It might have been season 1, I don't know, but then Buddy shoots him because his mom gave him the go-ahead to pull the trigger, but then his gun was empty and then Buddy shoots him. And then there's also the scene at the end of season 3 where he almost kills Helen because he thinks Helen's going to kill his family, but then Helen weasels her way out of it because she's like, actually, it was your mom's fault that Ben died. So I think that is definitely foreshadowing that Jonah will be put in another situation where he has a weapon and he has to make a choice between killing to save his family or turning his back on particularly his mother, who he totally hates at this point. So I think he might kill Wendy to save himself and Charlotte, because we did get that little confirmation in the mausoleum scene. It seemed like they were maybe going to go their separate ways, but then they told each other, no, we are going to stick together, and we both realize how messed up this is, and kind of their own little version of family is everything, that at least them two siblings are going to stick together. So I hope that they do. I really can't see all 4 members of the family making it out at the end, and if somebody has to die, it really should be Marty and Wendy. But we also have seen that this show kills the innocents, right? Ben died and he was innocent. Wyatt died and he was innocent. The worst players don't really die unless they really mess up, but the people who are just caught up in it could be expendable at any moment. So it'll be really interesting to see how that turns out. I hope it all goes well for the characters that I like, but it's probably not going to. But I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you some other time. I'll definitely be talking about the season finale of Ozark, so leave your predictions below if you want to start a conversation. Bye. I forgot to come back and talk about that scene again. I told you that I was going to come back to the scene where Ruth and Marty have their little last job moment, right? And she's helping him with the trap house thing. And that is actually a good note to end on, because that is what shows us where Marty has a line for his game, right? We don't see Marty lose his cool very often, but in that moment where he thought that Ruth was going to get killed, he took the gun from the pharmaceutical goon or whatever, right? He was willing to risk his life to get the gun to save Ruth from getting rampaged with the rest of the trap house guys. And so, obviously that was really risky of Marty to do, and it shows that he does see her as part of his family, but not quite as much as his actual family. Because remember in season 3, when Wendy was kidnapped by Mason, he pulled the trigger. He killed Mason to save Wendy, and he did it before it was too late. But then when he takes the gun to save Ruth in season 4, he doesn't quite get there. He's willing to risk his life to get the gun, but he doesn't shoot the guy before he gets the gun back, right? So it kind of shows that, like, yes, Ruth is a part of his family and he will risk himself for her, but she is not quite on the same level as, like, him caring about his actual family. And so that's going to be a really interesting dynamic to explore for the second part of season 4, because obviously Ruth is not there with Marty anymore. Ruth hates him. She is done. Like, once she lost Wyatt, it was like it's, even though it wasn't directly Marty's fault, like, she still knows that it's because of Marty that, like, her life has fallen apart. So I think it'll be really interesting to explore that dynamic where, like, Marty truly loves her and he does want what's best for her, but she's turned against him at this point. So, post hat clown Carlisle. Bye.